Well, welcome to our second panelist of the day. We have Laurie who's here, and Laurie has a very interesting background. I met her 5 years ago at the Global Workplace Forum, and it was just a pleasure talking to her. And we're so glad that she is part of this session today. And we're talking, as Eleanor started, about our arsenal of weapons. What has God given us to combat corruption? And Laurie, please introduce yourself. Tell us what you do, and then we'll get to the issue.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel, Willie. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm a professor with Redeemer University in Hamilton, Ontario. I teach in the management, marketing, and not-for-profit management concentrations of our School of Business. I have an MBA from McMaster University, and I also have a Master of Theological Studies from McMaster Divinity College. And it was as I was finishing up my MTS that I was challenged to think about what does it mean to be created in the image of God? So I've been able to apply that theological framework to all the courses I teach, and I thoroughly enjoy interacting with students around those biblical principles.
So, as this session is all about what resources God has given us, from an academic perspective, what resources are there available to educate people about corruption?
That's a really interesting question because post-secondary education has gone in circles, as I'm sure you can attest. A number of years ago, there was all kinds of ethical education required. There were tons of ethics courses that were part of post-secondary degrees, bachelor at the undergraduate level and at the graduate level. And then a few years ago, the decision was made to move away from a one-off type of ethics course and integrate ethical education into each of the courses. So instead of having one ethics course as part of an undergraduate degree, you would do a marketing course and there'd be a chapter in the text about marketing ethics. Or you would do an accounting course and there would be a chapter or a few paragraphs about accounting ethics. One of the areas that I feel was lacking was that dedicated focus on an ethics discussion. And I'm grateful that at Redeemer, the people who developed the business program felt the same way. So the the capstone course for our business program is business ethics because it's considered a philosophy of business course. And that has been really helpful to be able to take students, spend 13 weeks, 3 hours a week, talking about ethical issues. So that's one of the greatest resources that we have in helping to educate young people about what are some of the things I need to be thinking about as I move into career. At Redeemer, it's a fourth year course, so students will take it in their fourth year of the program. They will already have had good background in the various disciplines of business and some focused time studying their area of concentration.
Well, it sounds like you have worked out something that seems to work, but one of the challenges is not just teaching students, but how do you get the message through to them? That must be a challenge. And how do you face that?
It is because by the time students get to their fourth year of an undergraduate degree, they're going through courses thinking, okay, what do I need to do to get a good grade? What do I have to do on this case report? What books do I have to read? What don't I have to read? If it's recommended reading, I'm not even going to go near it. If it's required, I'll do it. So that's part of the struggle that we have. The other part of the struggle is students haven't they don't have the age, they don't have the experience. They haven't been out working to be faced with ethical challenges and ethical dilemmas. So to be able to spend 13 weeks of a term talking together about ethical issues and providing them with examples is really one way that we can overcome that challenge. The other challenge, studies are showing that people don't begin to think about ethics. That part of our brain isn't fully formed until we hit our early to mid 20s. So, in some ways, it doesn't make sense to have an ethics course at first or second year of university because 17 and 18-year-olds, their brain hasn't matured to the point where they can start thinking about ethical issues and how to resolve them. So, some of the challenges finding that right time, that right age. Some of the challenges helping them to think about actual situations that they're going to encounter when they go into the workforce. And some of it is about helping them to take a step back and not just think about what do I have to do to get a good grade on this course and then move on to another course.
That's interesting because one of the big challenges that people face is that as soon as they get out of university, they forget, either deliberately or intentionally, or just life takes over. They forget what they have learned. And so, how can we train the next generation of leaders? Because that's really basically what happens at university, but also so that those that have leadership skills can actually pass it on to the next generation.
And again, that's a really good question. You're asking some tough questions, Willie. One of the things that I experienced, I expect you experienced as you went through your university career, was that file cabinet of the brain where, I memorize the facts, I go into an exam, I spit them out. Those papers drop out of the back of the filing cabinet drawer when I move on to the next course. So I think one of the things that we've been able to zone in on is not teaching students a bunch of facts that they have to memorize and then they'll forget, but teaching them biblical principles. We've shaped the program at Redeemer not to drill into them business facts and biblical passages, but to create an umbrella of biblical principles through which they can see every course in the discipline. So that will also give them a framework then when they go out into their career, into the business world. They can think back to the principles that we talked about. So, for example, the concept of Imago Dei, the theology of Imago Dei, we are created in God's image. But what does that mean for business? Well, there are three big buckets of theologians' ideas about Imago Dei. The first is that we are created in God's image in the sense that we reflect his character, we reflect who he is. The second perspective is that we are his ambassadors. We are there to represent him in all areas because we are stewards of the earth and of all creation. And then the third concept is that we are created to live in relationship with others as the Trinity, the way God lives in relationship, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. If we teach them biblical principles, if we help students recognize that when I do business, when I work with my team in human resource management, for example, I need to look at the people on my team as being created in God's image. So what does that mean? It means I look for God's character in each of my teammates. I can't then do something unethical to one of my teammates because I would then be doing that to God. I would be defacing God's image in my teammates. So when we think about how we can train the next generation of leaders, let's equip them with a set of business principles that they can then filter every situation through that biblical principle. I love others because that's part of God's character, because that's how I live in relationship with others. It also means then that we help students navigate this and talk about this and think about it by presenting them with scenarios. Let's just not fill them with all the theory about philosophical ethical frameworks. Because if I have to remember the difference between utilitarianism and universalism and deontology, and I'm going to walk away and forget that. But
Mm.
if I help them to think about, okay, I'm faced with this scenario, this situation, let's talk about it, let's discuss it. For example, in our business ethics course, I tell students up front, I'm not here to lecture. You do the readings. We're going to come in and talk about this every class. I may help facilitate and guide the discussion, but we're here to talk about it. The more we talk about it, the more we can shape the ethical framework in our brain so that we will know how to live ethical lives.
So your role as a professor is not one just to stuff people with knowledge, but also to give them an experience and document that. And how do you do that? Because, the experience is not found in books, but books are a means by which experience is transferred. Uh, I hear that you have written a number of courses. Tell us a bit about them. What resources are available?
So, some of the work that I've been able to do is think seriously about the theology of Imago Dei and how that impacts various disciplines of business. One of the articles that my dean and co-author and friend and I have written focuses on human resource management. So if we really believe that the people God puts on our team are created in God's image, how is that going to affect the way we interact with them? We've also written an article about accounting. Now, for those accountants out there, if you can define a biblical debit or credit, I'm all in. It's really hard to say there's a biblical approach to accounting. On the other hand, there is very much a biblical approach to the character of an accountant. And if we can shape the character of our accounting students, we can help them to do accounting in a very ethical manner. I also had the privilege, Susan and I had the privilege of being able to speak to the Evangelical Missiological Society in 2020 about a new approach to missions and how we can use the theology of Imago Dei to help us become better ambassadors for Christ. Help us to learn how we can better evangelize. So, there are some very specific tools that we've been able to help develop. We also have had the privilege of writing case studies and teaching notes. In business education, a lot of, especially graduate level business education, is all focused around the case method, where you give a story about a true story about a business and a decision point that they've had to reach. Help the students identify what's the real issue here, analyze it using business theories and models, generate multiple viable alternatives and evaluate them, and then recommend a course of action. Part of that discussion is what's the most ethical approach? What are some of the unethical issues that you might encounter in a particular alternative or in the recommendation? What are some of the things that you need to help? So, those are some of the ways that we can help equip students, again, by talking about it, by discussing ethical issues, and helping them to be able to discern what is a biblical approach that is going to help us live ethical lives.
You talk a lot about the biblical approach, and the challenge quite often is not so much the biblical approach, but what is the biblical foundation? How do we, what does the Bible actually have to say to people who are listening uh, about our responsibility to teach the next generation?
I've thought a lot about that. And while we can quote passages like Psalm 78, there are all kinds of passages in Paul's writings and in the Pauline epistles. I keep going back again to biblical principles rather than trying to cherry pick verses. I keep going back to those principles. The Old Testament talked about mentoring. So as we walk with our children, let's talk to them and teach them and help them to learn. Psalm 78 reflects that whole concept of mentoring. Let's walk alongside and teach. Jesus mentored. He gathered together a group of 12 disciples. Beyond that, there were other disciples branching out in a one circle further out, another circle of influence. That mentoring then translated down into what the apostles did. And when you look at their letters, when you look at the book of Acts, even Stephen, the way he discipled, the way he was able to preach,
Mm.
Paul, Apollos, Priscilla and Aquila, Timothy, that concept of gathering a group, talking to them, walking with them, living with them, that's what I fall back on. My obligation as a professor, as we talked about earlier, is not to cram my students' heads full of pieces of knowledge, but to
Mm.
live my life alongside them, to talk with them as we have opportunity. Some of the best conversations I've had with my students have not been in the classroom. They've been after the class is over and we're gathering up our stuff and we step out into the hallway and that conversation continues. They
Mm.
stop by my office to pick up resources and we get talking about some of the issues. The conversations that we have outside the classroom are those areas where I can better help educate that coming generation.
Well, that's you've given us a whole lot of things that we can do. You've talked about attitude, our mindset, the foundational things. But is there one thing in particular that each one of us can do? We're not all professors. But is there something that each one of us can do to raise the awareness of corruption? I notice you haven't used the word anti-corruption once, but it's foundational to everything that you've been saying. But is there one thing that people should take as a takeaway that would inspire them to help the process along?
You're right, Willie. I haven't used the term anti corruption, perhaps because my focus has been on integrity. And if we can be people of integrity of ourselves, if we can encourage the coming generation to be people of integrity, I think that's going to go a long way to helping combat corruption. If I can help that coming generation be aware of what are some of the ethical issues, the opportunities for corruption that they're going to face, how can I equip them then to become people of integrity so that they will recognize those opportunities to slide into corruption? And it isn't always a full blown, we're going to do something that's corrupt. It's sometimes an opportunity to do something that may not really be kosher. I wouldn't call it corruption, but it may not be exactly ethical, but nobody's going to know. And if we can help that coming generation recognize that even a slight veering off course is taking us away from being people of integrity, that's going to be a slide into corruption. So how can we combat corruption? By helping people become people of integrity. And I know there's a lot of conversation about the younger generation and their ethics aren't great and they cheat. Like I know we talk about this in school all the time, that younger generation, they're cheating, they're going to the internet, they're looking for answers, they're buying case reports and if we can help them learn to become people of integrity, and we do that by walking alongside them, by giving them our time, by showing them that we value them enough to spend time with them. I think we lose sight of the fact that the coming generation are people who value authenticity. And they see that authenticity by us allowing them to get to know us. I know I'm talking in circles, but if we can be available to them, if we can help them recognize that our lives are open to them, we are willing to spend time with them, and by them getting to know us, can we mentor them? Can we encourage them to become people of integrity?
Those are wonderful parting words of wisdom about integrity. And, it's one of those things is people have got to not only see someone walking beside them, but living beside them and also being part of their lives. And this is where this authenticity comes in. And if only there was a way to measure authenticity. We have Transparency International, the Corruption Perception Index. Maybe that's what we can leave AI with to do in the next generations to have authenticity indices.
Mm.
Any last word before we close off our session?
Get to know Jesus. Get to know Jesus. Spend time with him. Be his image before others. Recognize, look for his image in others, and encourage that, nurture it, help develop it. Again, that's a way that we can encourage people to be people of integrity. If we can be people of integrity, we can help to counteract corruption. That's a way to strengthen anti-corruption opportunities. Get to know Jesus.
Wonderful words. And if there's anybody who is watching and would like to follow up on this discussion, please send us an email to the Global Integrity Network saying that you'd like to get in touch with Laurie and would like to talk about her, and we'll make sure that that message gets on to her. Thank you so much for joining us and continue in your march to fight corruption through integrity. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Willie. It's been a pleasure talking with you today.
Bless you.